Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of the Dreadful Night podcast. My name is Charlotte, and I've always been obsessed with stories about things that go bump in the night. And I figured, why not try to start a podcast where I go in depth with these stories and try to find out the truth behind them? Tonight, we'll be discussing the Winchester house. What secrets lay deep within the foundation of this labyrinth, and why is its construction so shrouded in mystery? I'm also joined by my very special guest host, Sugary. Sugary, hey, how are you tonight?
Oh, I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So, looking into it at first glance, I know that you were pretty excited to be discussing the Winchester house. You said you had seen quite a few movies on it and you had researched it quite a bit. So you're like, "Hey, let's talk about this. Let's try to bring this to the table." What is your general idea of it? What do you think is happening with the Winchester house? Why was its construction even started in the first place? Why did it go on for so long? What's your opinion on all that?
Um, to start off with, I just thought that it was a result of her being stricken with delusional grief, or that she believed the psychic when he told her that her husband said, "If you don't do this, then the ghosts are gonna haunt you." I waffled between those two because I couldn't find anything that said anybody else had seen anything. So I was so excited to find something where somebody else had some kind of proof, or somebody seen something or heard something.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. Why do you think that there's so much, I guess, just lack of evidence? Why do you think there's, not somebody that has come out of the shadows from some point and said, "Hey, this is, what really went down with the Winchester house. This is why, this is what's going on with it."
I don't know. And at this point, I think that's a bigger mystery than why the house.
I think so
Like,
too.
forget about why the house is like that. Like, why is nobody talking about it this many years later? Why
Yeah,
is there not one descendant of an aunt, cousin, uncle, delivery driver that seen, heard, knows something? Nope, nothing.
yeah, nothing at all. Nobody's come forward and said, "Hey, this is XYZ as to
This is
what's
my
going
point
on."
of view. This is what I heard. Nope.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, come on. It's been too long. There's no way everybody signed an NDA.
The entire ancestry and everybody's like, "No, we're under an NDA at birth." You put your handprint on like an NDA and you're like, "Yeah, I can't talk about this."
That's what it
Yeah.
feels like, though.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Trying to
It's
find information was worse than pulling teeth.
Oh man. So when you had first mentioned, because little known fact, me and Sugary go back and forth each week, trying to figure out what we're gonna talk about, during the next episode of the podcast. And for this one, I was, I was kind of excited when Sugary said, "Hey, what about the Winchester house?" And I was like, okay, let me start Googling, let me figure out, because I knew a little bit about the Winchester house and I knew a little bit about, Sarah Winchester. Like, okay, she was married to this guy who, basically owned the Winchester Rifle Company. Um, and in actually researching it, because me and Sugary, whenever we look into these podcasts, we really dig. I mean, Sugary was on page what, like 6 or 7 of
Of
Google's.
Google,
Yeah,
right? Like,
looking
never
for this stuff.
before seen Google pages.
So, and I mean, I was going through blogs and posts and just, I mean, excerpts, reviews, I mean, everything, just scouring to try to find information. And like you said, it was like pulling teeth. It was like, okay, this person is saying something that they heard that the tour guide said, or this person said something that was a part of a theory like previously written in somebody else's post. So it just kind of felt
Yes.
like there was,
Everything's being regurgitated.
yeah, like you know how they always say, well, stories and folklore is passed down through the generations, and it's like playing a game of telephone where it's like one person starts off with saying, "Oh, Sarah built this house," and it ends with, "What do you want for dinner?" You know, it's like it's just how it goes. So in looking through it, the only facts that I could really find were just, you know, some basic facts on Sarah and William,
Their
and
birth,
their
their
birth.
death, when
Yep.
they were married.
Yep.
Like, they're a famous couple. Even
Yeah.
that. Why isn't there more information than that?
I mean, you would think like the heir to the Winchester Rifle Company, the gun
There would
that
be
won the
something. Like,
yeah,
just,
it's
no.
something, anything, like where is it, you know? Um so
Supposedly the records were lost, but even then, I would
mhm,
still think somebody would have it written down where he went to school, what he did,
mhm.
something.
Something, definitely, yeah. Um, let's try to, before we get into the theories, like all of the little, you know, theories that we found throughout our search that say, you know, this is why, this is why, this is why, yada yada. So this all begins with William Winchester and Sarah Pardee, later known, of course, as Sarah Winchester. They get married around 1862 and have a child who unfortunately passes away about a month after her birth in 1866. Flash forward, this leaves us to around 1880 when William Winchester's father, Oliver Winchester, dies and leaves his son the entirety of the Winchester Repeating Arms Company. He was the only son, so he gets, you know, the entire company to his own. Just about 3 months later, turning into a new year of 1881, William was suffering from tuberculosis, right? So he eventually succumbs to tuberculosis, and Sarah inherits about $20 million during that time frame, or what could be considered about $20 million back in 1881, and about half of the Winchester Repeating Arms stock. So she gets money. And calculating this out, it looks to be that she was making, just from her stock alone, roughly $26,000 in 2019 estimate, $26,000 a day. And her inheritance total, that $20 million, converted into nowadays money, was about $560 million. So she already has $560 million from inheritance, and additionally, she's getting $26,000 a day. This is all happening 1881. About 4 years later, 1885, Sarah goes. She moves to California, specifically like the San Jose area. Moving into another year, into 1886, she buys a 2-story farmhouse in and around the area and starts building and remodeling what she called Yanada Villa, which is the former name of the Winchester Mystery House. Now, 1888, her niece, or her favorite niece, Marion Miriam, goes and moves in with her. She's like a teenager around this time, and she wanted to get away from her parents, like the household. She said it was like kind of toxic. So she says, I'm going to go live with Aunt Sarah, and she lives with her for about 15 years. Now we're going to flash forward some more, and we get to 1903 when Marion Miriam, she goes and marries Frederick Marriott Jr., and she decides, you know, she's going to move out of the house. So Sarah's living there for a little while by herself, and she decides in 1910 that she's going to buy a second home in Atherton, where she could be closer to her sister Isabel, and also her niece Miriam. They were living out like closer towards Atherton, and she said, okay, I'm just gonna, you know, get a house next to you guys and just stay a lot of the time here because I'm kind of lonely in my house. So roughly about 12 years after this, she eventually dies. and leaves the majority of her fortune to her niece and a couple of her family members. Interesting thing to note here is that one of the only things that Sarah does not like leave in her will is the house itself, is the Winchester house, Yanata Villa. She doesn't leave that anywhere. She just basically like leaves it up for grabs type thing. And then from there, about 5 months later, this couple comes in, they buy the house, and they open it up as a tourist attraction, claiming, this is the Winchester Mystery House. Why is this house built like this? There's staircases to nowhere, and there's doors to nowhere, and there's even a 7-story tower on the property. Like, everything's built really crazy. What kind of cuckoo stuff went on down here, right? So, Shuri, why do you think Sarah left this house out of her will? Why do you think she didn't decide to like give it to anybody? She just left it up for grabs type thing.
No, I've been trying to figure that out ever since I discovered that. That was one of the rare cases of new information that I didn't know. And there's no logical reason. I don't know. How can you have so much passion for doing something and then just toss it aside like it meant nothing?
Yeah, because keep in mind here that the construction on this house lasted right around in between 36 to 38 years. So this was continuous remodeling for 36 to 38 years. Why would somebody like that inherently focused and like have all of their passion, all of their ideas, all of their time and effort and energy and money put into a project that lasts for that long and then just leave it up for grabs?
It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
It's not logical in any way that I can think of.
So I think from there, let's get into a couple of the theories as to why maybe that this house was left out of the will, right? So there's a theory that, of course, the house is haunted. Like, there's the spirits of the people that died from the Winchester rifles that haunt the house. There's also the theory that there was something to do with like the Freemasons alongside the house, which we'll get into both of those here in just a second. But there's quite a few theories as to like basically she didn't want to pass the burden of this house onto her family. I mean, that kind of makes sense, but the reasoning behind it is kind of unknown at the same time, right? So that made me dig. So the ghost one. Let's get into that. Sugary, what do you know of the ghost theory that surrounds the Winchester Mystery House?
Well, I think one of the strongest theories is that the ghosts were people that had been killed with the Winchester rifle.
Yeah.
And there's been speculation of ghosts from people that have been killed during the construction of the house itself.
Right. And you would think in your head, like, well, how does Sarah know specifically that these ghosts are from that? And it said that allegedly during her time of grieving, like right after her husband had passed, she at some point had contacted this psychic by the last name of Coots. And this is before she moves to California and right after her husband dies. She goes to go see this guy named Coots. And Coots says, I talked to your husband. Your husband says that these are the ghosts that are after you. This is what you need to do to appease them. You need to, continuously build on this house. And it's even further stated that she would hold like nightly seances to get guidance from these ghosts to figure out, okay, what do I need to build next? But there's also a theory that she would just continuously build on the house, but do it in such a random and just kind of like preposterous way as a way to kind of deter or confuse the ghosts. Like if the ghosts thought, oh, well, there's a door that leads here, let me go through the door, but then actually the door is like to the outside, maybe the ghost would get confused and not haunt her. And that's kind of confusing because it's like, how does a ghost not know which way to go? Like you tell me the ghost like it needs a sign, like this is where Sarah is. Like go
dead
on
end.
like dead end.
That one never made sense to me. That it was to confuse the ghost. That never.
Yeah. Now that's that theory. That's the ghost theory. Like she's been plagued by these ghosts, and she found out about it from this psychic named Coots, and that it was the ghosts of the people that died in the house, and it was the ghosts of the people that got killed by the Winchester rifles, which would be excuse my French, a fuck ton of ghosts. How many? This is the gun that won the West. How many people have been killed by a Winchester rifle? So you want to tell me there's like thousands?
Yeah, the gun that won the West was just in 1873. That wasn't even 10 years before she inherited.
Yeah.
So that was the gun that won the West. So I can imagine that at that time she had even more income. Not more than the 1,000, but that was probably because of that rifle. That was their most famous rifle. And that was made less than 10 years before,
like, her husband died.
Yeah.
So here is theory number 2, setting aside the paranormal supernatural stuff, which is involving the Freemasons. Now, this one threw me for like a whirlwind loop, right? So I found this website, and it's called thetruthaboutsarahwinchester.com. So essentially this is kind of like a research thesis or like a research paper that somebody has written and like posted onto their website, where they basically claim that the reason why Sarah Winchester built this house to begin with is because she was actually a part of the Freemasons, and she was building this house as a labyrinth that would be used for inductees into the Freemasons. According to the truthaboutsarahwinchester.com, it states that a man named Ralph Rambo says that Sarah went on a 3-year world tour before settling in California in 1884. Now, it says that while she was there, she got into this movement that was happening in France called Co-Freemasonry, and this allowed both males and females to join the Freemasons. So, given that Sarah was a woman of status, and in her childhood she was seen as a very intelligent woman, she came from a very affluent background, she would be, welcomed in with open arms into this Freemason movement. It stated that essentially they think, this website meaning, that Sarah Winchester, while she's over there, she gets accepted into the Freemasons, and she constructs this house very specifically to create or construct this labyrinth. This is like one of the first entry tests to get into the Freemasons, is that a inductee has to escape from this labyrinth and like use clues throughout the labyrinth to like, it's basically like a really, really cutting edge and expensive escape room. I don't know about this one. This one sounds a little bit out there. Essentially, this theory throws you for a loop and breaks down number by number, design by design, an element of the house, just how this entire house is a labyrinth built for like Freemason society. I just don't know about this one. I think it's, number one, it's very hard to even explain for the podcast. If you can't tell, it's very hard to explain this theory.
It seems a little far-fetched.
It's a little bit far-fetched. Like, it uses like a so it uses a coded cipher, essentially, and it's basically saying that Sarah used like a coded cipher and somehow took these numbers and put them into a cipher. And then if you use these 5 different ciphers called the simple cipher, the K cipher, the reverse cipher, the short cipher, and the Pythagorean cipher, that you can somehow like get all of these words or these clues
Is there a cipher to cipher the ciphers?
I probably. Probably. I just don't know about this one. But if you guys want to like check it out and see the full theory, again, the website is called thetruthaboutsarahwinchester.com. And it just goes into detail with just how the room design is so specific, and that these numbers come into play over and over and over again. And that kind of proves the fact that this kind of proves the fact that, you know, she was involved in Freemason activity. So those 2 theories in and of themselves seem a little bit far-fetched. Not so much the paranormal supernatural one. It depends upon, of course, your beliefs of the paranormal supernatural. But for me, I feel like the Freemason theory is just so... It's very well thought out. It's very well constructed. I just feel like it's so out of the way and so just kind of, not far-fetched, because I don't want to put it like a derogatory spin on it, but just so
I didn't
strange.
mean to diminish anybody's beliefs.
Yeah.
I'm just horrible with science and numbers, and it's just beyond my understanding.
Yeah, it is
literally.
way like beyond what I could even grasp or conceptualize.
Exactly.
However, in looking through all of the different research that I did, and in looking through all of the different sources and articles and blogs and reviews, I eventually stumbled across an article talking about the actual truth. However, in looking through and reviewing all of the different cases and stories that I found, the one that like most caught my eye out of any of these articles that I've read, out of any of these blogs that I've read, there is an article by the Los Altos town crier. Now, this article was written back in February of 2010 by Elliot Burr, and it essentially says, the title of it is Los Altos History Museum Display Dispels Myths of Sarah Winchester. So in this, I believe it's Elliot Burr interviews the executive director of the museum, Laura. She says that the entire story of the Winchester Mystery House is just completely blown out of proportion, and that the truth is that when William died in 1881, Sarah goes and moves in with her sister Isabel, her youngest sister Isabel. And from there, her and her sister, you know, they're staying together for a little while, and they decide, okay, we're going to go move to California. They go there, and Sarah buys up a whole bunch of the land over in that area. Now, from there, Sarah and Isabel live pretty closely to one another. In fact, Isabel's niece, Marion, she goes and she lives with Sarah for about like 15 years. And after Marion moves out, Sarah moves in with Isabel, and she's living with her for a little while. And that's pretty much it. Like, she lives with the sister and like kind of like her close family that moved with her out there until her death. And all this whole time, you know, she's still remodeling this house. So that kind of like caught my attention, right? Because I was like, hang on a sec. This museum director says, no, this is like some crazy myths that people are talking about. There's got to be something else behind this, right? So I did even more digging. And so I found that when Sarah was a younger kid, she was extremely intelligent. She knew multiple languages. She was very good in science, very good in math, and she had a fascination with architecture. Now, in thinking about it, my theory is this. Sarah goes, lives her life like normal until William dies. She moves in with her sister, and they decide, okay, cool, like we've had enough of it over here in Connecticut. We're going to go move to California. So they go over there. Sarah's got a whole bunch of money. She's like, I'm going to buy a big property. And because of the fact that Sarah maybe didn't have anything else to really do, she didn't really have any say so in the company. She just like owned, she basically just like owned like half the stock. Like she didn't have a super say so in whatever, you know, happened, like business ideas for the Winchester company itself. She probably was bored and was like, what can I do? And I think that the Winchester Mystery House is not that much of a mystery at all. I think that she built this house as a way to kind of like a passion project, as a way to express her interest and her love of architecture, and just like throw it all into the house and say, okay, cool, I'm going to start building this, and then I want it to design this way, and I want it this way. And it didn't matter where she put stuff. Like she was like, this is my project house. I'll build stuff wherever I want to build it. I don't care if there's a staircase going crooked sideways into the ceiling. I don't care if there's a door that when you open it, you might fall down to, you know, 2 stories below. I just want to build this how I want to build it. And the entirety of this house is just her thoughts of architecture coming to life. Now, what kind of cemented this theory for me was the fact that she actually fired the original architect for the Winchester Mystery House, and she made herself as the primary architect because I guess whatever the architect was doing previously wasn't to her exact specifications, or maybe he wasn't doing it correctly. So she said, you know what? That's it. I'm just going to do it myself. Sugar, what do you think of this?
And I think that's a plausible theory. I still think that grief played a bigger factor, and if her grief focused on the architect and that was her outlet, then I mean I could see that, but I still think that grief was a bigger motivator.
So, do you think that she, like, how do you correlate grief into her building a house? Do you think like that kind of motivated, like she had to get her mind out of being in that grief state, so she just kind of put everything into the house type thing?
I don't think it was about getting her mind out of it. I think it was about channeling. Like some people sing, some people paint. I mean, there's famous people in a lot of occupations that do very well when they're very passionate,
So basically,
even
it's
if
just
it's
like an
with
expressor.
anger. Yeah, I'm saying that I think grief was the motivator
Mm-hmm.
and architect was the outlet. That's just she just channeled that energy
Mm-hmm.
into there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that because it just doesn't, it honestly doesn't make sense. And I'm going to be completely transparent on this. When both Sugar and I were researching this and we were looking to go to kind of flesh out our ideas for the podcast and kind of like how we wanted to um, put like a timeline on things, how we kind of wanted to discuss things, we both got kind of frustrated and kind of disappointed because of the fact that whenever we do these podcasts, we always go back and forth about like new facts that we found when researching whatever it is, and we go back and forth about, you know, what is this, what is that, how did this happen, when did this happen. And with this one, it felt like the only facts that we could find was when Sarah and William were born, when
That's
she
not
had her
even
child.
proven. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know that? When she was born, there's like a 3-year window. They don't even have a record of the exact date. That's a guesstimate.
I mean, well, there you go.
That's what I mean. That
Yeah.
so that was the disappointment for me,
Mm-hmm.
is the excitement comes from finding something out. I'm already
Mm-hmm.
excited about the story,
Yeah.
and to find out that the story doesn't flesh out any further than that
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a letdown a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly when you try to dispel, in a sense, the myth of or the mythology of the Winchester house, you just go in a loop de loop of you just go in a loop de loop of
Yes.
yes, of
Yes.
of the same conspiracy theories told a different way. And I mentioned this again, like a game of telephone. It's like one person, maybe a tour guide, maybe a bystander, maybe an article writer, whatever it is, says, she went and she saw this psychic, and the psychic told her what's these ghosts and yada yada yada. And then it's passed down the line of people, and then next thing you know, now it's, oh, now she holds seances every night at midnight till 2 a.m. and rings a bell and da 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 da. And like, I got so kind of frustrated on this episode because of that fact, because
Yeah, I
everything
agree.
just sounds like a conspiracy theory. Like when we covered the Salem witch trials and when we covered Lizzie Borden, we had fact to go off of. Or at least very, very highly likely fact, right? Like there's a slight chance that maybe the numbers are off or maybe the dates are off or whatever, but we knew the general factor idea in each case, whether it be, the time somebody was murdered or the day that, this person was executed or the time this trial happened. We knew that. And we knew the timeline of events pretty well. With
Yeah, and
this
that there's
one,
so little information about somebody that's a famous gun manufacturer is just mind-boggling to me.
and that's what gets me as well, too. It's insane to see the fact that you have somebody with as big of a name as Winchester, and there's like nothing on him at all. But Sarah
Bare
Winchester,
minimum.
yeah, Sarah Winchester, you can find a decent amount of information on. Not even a decent amount, I would say. You can find the bare minimum on Sarah Winchester. You just know she's the mind behind the mystery house. But when you go to Google search William Winchester, it's like you can find on like findagrave.com, like he was born then, he's buried here. You know, there's no in between. It's like you know he got married to Sarah. At one point he lived in Connecticut. He was like born in Boston. That. They had a kid, and he died of tuberculosis. He died when he was 43. What happened to the 43 years of that time span being that famous? Like, I'm not understanding, where did all that
Yeah.
information go?
Yeah, where did he go to school at? What was his upbringing? What did it consist of? Or no, it's not talked about. They said some of the records were lost,
Mm-hmm.
but
Even by word of mouth, though,
yeah,
like, even if some of the records were lost, like maybe a distant relative, a cousin, a niece, a nephew, an uncle,
that I
somebody.
didn't even understand that about the house. That's
Mm-hmm.
what I'd said. I can't believe that somebody hasn't said something. Nobody
Yeah.
knew what the inside of the house looked like. There's very few pictures,
Mm-hmm.
and nobody knows what was taken out of the house. There's not
Mm-hmm.
a list of these are the items that were taken out,
Mm-hmm.
but
And
there
there's only
had to
like
have
one
been
picture.
delivery drivers that were there,
Mm-hmm.
or I mean, somebody knocked on the door. Somebody's seen something at some time, and that
Yeah.
nobody has ever said anything about that is just odd to me.
And a lot of people might point out the fact, well, Sarah was a recluse. Like, she didn't really talk about anything to anybody. She was just always in her house. You never really saw her out and about. And there's only like one picture of her in that carriage that you can find when you go to Google search her. Otherwise, it's like a painted
I get
portrait of
that,
her.
and I get that,
But
and I
still, though,
understand
a
why
maid didn't talk,
Daisy.
a construction
Exactly.
worker.
I was going to say I understand even why Daisy would keep that secret.
Yeah.
But as the generations have came along, like a great 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 grandchild isn't gonna feel that same obligation to keep a secret. So
Yeah.
why not say, well, I know that my however many great grandmother did this or said this, or the reason she lived with her is because she didn't want to be alone. Like that, nothing has been
Mhm.
said, good or bad.
Do you know, I think I have a theory on the lack of information as well, let alone what happened behind the Winchester house.
I think
So I think that the reason why there's so much of a lack of information is that the story is kind of already there. Like the folklore aspect story is already there for the Winchester house, right? So they're saying it's ghosts, and they're saying it's this, and they're saying it's that. If somebody were to
that's
come
more
forward,
popular than to
yeah,
tell the truth.
yeah, if somebody were to come
Ah,
forward and say, hey, my great
smart.
great grandfather, worked on the Winchester house for how many years was it? Like 36 to 38, something like that. My
Yes,
great great
yes.
grandfather worked on this house for 30 years of his life, and he saw this, that, and the other. Who's gonna go and like say, oh yeah, we want to buy that story and post it that all of this is fake? Nobody, because you can make money off of the fact that you're adding to the myth. You look on YouTube, you look on podcasts, you look on blogs and articles and
Yeah,
websites
there's already been a couple movies just about the house
and movies
and
alone. The 2018 movie
mm-hmm.
Winchester that just came out, well, in recent years has just come out.
Yeah.
There's so much money to be made off of this story that it feels like it's kind of like the gift
That the
that keeps on
story is
giving.
more exciting than the truth. Yeah, that makes
Exactly.
sense.
That this
That
is,
makes a lot of
and
sense.
it's like, okay, if you had a newspaper come to the great great grandson and say, okay, what's the truth? And then, like, he tells them, and they're like, cool, thanks, here's like $50. When turn it around, somebody's like, I worked as a tour guide, and this is the truth. She murdered a bunch of people in the house, and da 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 da, whatever. Oh my God, that's so
It's better.
amazing.
That's gonna
Here's
sell
10
more.
grand.
Let's do. Yeah.
Let's do that.
Yep.
So I think it's just very much portrayed so twistedly and
Which
so
I mean, that
strangely in the
explains the
media.
reason for keeping the silence. That
Mm-hmm.
explains the reason for perpetuating it, but it still doesn't explain obviously the reason for the construction to begin with. That like why she made it like that is something
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone's gonna 100% ever know.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like with this podcast, I'm just going to give it my best guess. And, like the theory I said before about this being a passion project of hers, and maybe this is what kind of, she put all of her effort and time into, just like how an artist, constantly paints, or, a musician
Yes.
constantly makes music. This was it for her. This is what she did. And instead of buying a bunch of properties and remodeling it, she just bought this one massive property and kept remodeling it over and over and over and over again, in ways that she wanted, and in designs that she wanted to do. And then maybe she realized at the end of it why it wasn't included in the will is, well, who's going to want to buy this house? This is just kind of like my artwork. Let people see it type thing. Let it go to whoever and let people do whatever with it. And that's what became of it. I mean, that's what I'm going with. That's what I'm sticking with. Because Freemason stuff, I'm just like, oh, maybe, but it's so out of the realm of what I could possibly understand that I just have a hard time even slightly agreeing with that. And paranormal supernatural, again, that's a touchy subject because some people might believe in ghosts, some people might not, but it feels like that one's like a little bit more like, okay, maybe, but in all honesty, looking at it, because of the fact that it just doesn't make any sense, I think the most like blatant answer of she just did this for fun might be the most truthful or the most close to the truth.
Maybe I still think that it was grief and not fun, but outlet either way.
Yeah, like an outlet either way.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
I don't think that there was any rhyme and reason because she never meant there to be. I think
mhm.
that it's very telling that not only did their only child die, but they never had or adopted any more children.
Yeah.
So they had she had no need for that huge of a house except to play with architect wise.
Yeah. Like just basically a artist with like a massive canvas to paint on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no need. Like that still doesn't explain leaving it out for me. That still
Yeah.
doesn't explain because putting that much time and energy into something
Mhm.
and then just dismissing it, that doesn't something's fishy there for me. That doesn't feel right.
I mean, it could be though. Like, it's never stated that the house was in the will. It's just thought like it just kind of went to whoever type thing, to the highest bidder, got auctioned off. I mean, it could just be
Well,
that
I think the
maybe they
very
didn't
isn't
want it.
if something's auctioned off, isn't that because there's back taxes? I thought
I mean,
I thought when something was auctioned off, it was because something was owed on it. So it wouldn't go to
well,
somebody because it was.
unless like nobody claimed it. You know what I'm saying? So, like, for instance,
I'm not. Yeah,
well, for
I'm not
instance, like
sure.
nowadays, right? Like, let's say a house is abandoned. Normally, I think it's like the state that, and somebody can correct me on this. I could be completely wrong here, but I think that if
The
you
state, the
legally,
county, the city. Yeah,
yeah,
somebody claims it.
so like essentially, if you own a house, like that is your house, the deed is in your name, and then you die or like whatever, and you don't pass the deed to anybody else, then that house is now up to whoever's lands it's on, you know, whether that be the county or the city or whatever it is. And I think it just goes to them and they basically take over ownership of the house. And then they can either use it for something in the city or county government or whatever, or they can auction it off and say, hey, this is an abandoned house. You know, this goes to the highest bidder. I think that's how it works. I mean, I could be completely wrong. Somebody's going to be like, this is how it is, you know, but I think that's how it works. And I think that, you know, she could have just done that. Like, she could have just said, you know, here's my house. Y'all can have it if you want it. And then nobody was like, sure, I'll take your crazy looking house. Like, what the hell am I gonna do with it? Like, it's kind of like when somebody gives you a fruitcake for Christmas. You're kind of like, oh, thanks. Like, you don't really want to like do anything, so you just keep it for a little bit until the person leaves, and you're like, okay, let me throw this out. All right, that just about sums everything up. I'll see you guys next week on the Dreadful Night podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a good night.